Hi and welcome to Royvon YouTube channel. If you're interested in dog training and care and everything in between, then I highly recommend that you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notifications each time we upload a video. My name's Jodie and today's topic is dog leads. Okay, so one of the first leads that we're going to look at is your more kind of typical traditional G-clip dog lead, okay? So G-clip because of the cliplets at the end, like this, and then tends to have a standard loop at the end of it, okay? So these come in various lengths and also different materials. So I personally like to choose a material that's soft on my hands so that it isn't too rough. But this is your standard kind of dog lead, okay? So clipping it onto the dog's collar or the dog's harness. So this is the type of lead that you would use typically to, walk your dog along the street or, to the park. And obviously it's what I would call a fixed length lead. So you can't make it any longer. You can obviously make it a bit shorter if you kind of take some of the slack, but you can't lengthen the lead really beyond what it's made to be. So this is your kind of what I would consider standard dog lead. If you're just doing everyday normal walks with your dog, so walks along the, like we said, along the roadside or something like that. So this would be one of the leads that I'd be looking to recommend over perhaps some of the other ones that we're going to look at. Okay, the next type of lead we're going to look at is also a G-clip lead, but it's what I'd call a double-ended lead, okay? So actually this one comes with two clips or two G-clips at either end. And you'll see as you go along the length of the lead, you have all of these loops or D-rings, okay? And they're designed so that you can actually make this lead different lengths. So whilst the other one we looked at was a static length lead, so it's only really going to be as long as what the manufacturers made it to be, this one can be any length you like. So at its shortest length, it's kind of like a standard lead. We can then extend it to make it longer and use that kind of halfway point, okay, so that we've got a little bit more leash length. And then we can also make it its longest length by using that final clip, which also gives you a little bit of a handle at the end as well to be able to hold. And that makes it much longer, okay? So this is quite nice to have a little bit of flexibility and variety as well, rather than it just being that one standard length of lead. So again, this would be the type of lead that I would be recommending to people to use for just their standard everyday dog walk, okay? So I would always, when you're walking your dog along next to the road, try and have it at the shortest length that you can use, whereby the dog has still got enough loose lead to walk nicely so that we're not creating lots of tension, but so that we're not actually giving the dog so much lead that they're potentially going to encounter hazards or just get into all kinds of mischief sniffing along the road, okay? So we want to kind of be able to give them a length of lead, which means that we can be safe but also be comfortable. Another type of lead that people will have encountered quite a lot is your kind of slip lead, okay? So this doesn't have any clips, as you'll see. It's based upon the fact that you can create a loop at the end. That loop then goes around your dog's neck and it then just tightens depending upon how much pressure goes on the lead. They do also come with these toggles that you can then move down the length of the lead to then be able to prevent that from opening up any bigger, okay, so that you can set it to a size which means that hopefully it's gonna be a good fit but not too loose to come over your dog's head, okay? So again, doesn't alter in length, it's a standard length. Some you can get shorter or longer than others, but generally they're about this kind of length. Pros and cons of this one. So for me, I would use this more out of a form of convenience, okay? So if you need to get a dog quickly from A to B, perhaps you're not confident whether the collar on the dog is tight enough for them to not slip that collar if you put a G-clip lead on that collar. This means that you can ensure that the lead will stay on and be at a good level of tightness, which means that the dog can't back out of it. So for me, it's nice to use for convenience, so to get dogs around easily. And for a lot of dogs that are working on loose lead walking, some people might be recommended to use this as a piece of equipment or a tool to help aid with loose lead walking. But unless you put the training in with it, all you're going to end up with is a dog that pulls really, really hard and actually ends up kind of throttling themselves a little bit at the end of the lead because this leash will tighten with the more pressure that they put on it, okay? So as with any tool that we use, it always needs to come alongside training to be able to make sure that you're using that tool effectively. But sometimes there's a bit of a misconception or a bit of a myth that goes along with these, that if you put this on, it's a magic wonder and it's going to fix it. But actually, you'll probably just end up with your dog kind of choking and coughing quite a lot at the end of it if you don't train at the same time. This one's a little bit different, okay? This one comes with like a bungee feature built in. So it has a G-clip, it has a bungee. It actually has a handle halfway down, and then we have a handle at the end, and then some more G-clips. So it comes with this bungee feature, and to me, that's one of the main features. The other bits, if I'm completely honest, even as a trainer, I can't really see what they're for, okay? Maybe we can shorten it up here like this, but then the handle's down there. I'm not sure. But design-wise, I do see people with it, with the bungee, because I think that if the dog pulls, perhaps it's a little bit kinder on your joints and your shoulders. But for me, from a dog training point of view, the bungee doesn't really add a whole lot of benefit, okay? If your dog can walk nicely, it's much better for them to just be on a standard length of lead. For me, with the bungee, I would imagine that if your dog's really pulling, you're just going to end up with a dog that's yo-yoing at the end of this, okay, rather than kind of walking nicely in one fixed position. So whilst it might be gentle to you, again, as a training aid, it needs to come alongside some form of training, because otherwise you're just going to have the dog kind of yo-yoing its way along the street, okay? But yeah, this is another one that you might find in various guises, different types of clips, buckles, what have you, but with the bungee feature being its main part. Okay, another type of lead, which might be more traditional, in that these may have been around quite a long time, are your kind of chain leads. Now, this one's obviously a very short length, which is another style of lead that you can go for. Perhaps if you've got quite a tall dog, okay, and you don't need all of that extra lead length, you just need this. And with this clip to perhaps quite a tall dog next to me, I would still be able to have quite a loose lead and not have lots of extra lead to have to manage in my hand. So for a short lead, that's one of the benefits of it. If you see it being used on a dog, might also be because that dog has had a history of biting its lead or biting through a lead. And if you're using something material, you might be getting through quite a few leads, and obviously it could be quite unsafe, okay? So while someone is working on that training issue separately, this would be a much safer option to be able to use with the dog, because even if they do mouth at it or bite at it, they're not gonna get through the lead, okay? So that might also be a reason why you see some dogs using them. And for others, it might just be personal preference on this is the type of lead that they like to use. So this type of lead is a Flexi Lead, or some people might call it an extendable lead. And these are very commonplace these days. So the idea being that you have a spool or a reel of lead that exists inside the case, and that you attach this to your dog's collar or harness, and that they can have as much lead length that they like at any given time. It comes with some buttons and controls here, which obviously mean that you can stop the lead so that the dog doesn't take any extra lead, and that you can also then flick another button up, which means that that is now fixed at that length, okay? So it's flexible in its length. This style of lead is of most benefit really when you're in outdoor spaces with lots of space around you, lots of room around you, where it is safe for your dog to be able to have that length of lead at any given time. When it's not safe to use is alongside the roads, okay, where your dog can take any length of lead that it likes, because obviously if your dog sees something that is of interest to it and it suddenly darts out, your reflex time to be able to stop that dog and be able to bring it back in is much less than if you have just a normal standard length of lead whereby you can guide your dog back really quickly. So definitely not for using in really busy places, perhaps where there's lots of people, definitely not alongside traffic. And also if you're using it in public places as well, just be mindful of the fact that, you know, if your dog goes out of sight or, you know, disappears around a corner, you have no idea what your dog's doing. So you want to make sure that you reel that dog in and you have it on a nice fixed length lead before it disappears out of sight or around lots of busy places and people, because you don't want this getting wrapped up around people's ankles. So leads like this as well come in different sizes. So the bigger your dog, so the more your dog weighs, the bigger Flexi Lead you're going to need, okay? The other thing about Flexi Leads that not many people necessarily realise is that if you're walking your dog on a Flexi Lead all of the time, so you don't use one of those standard length G-clip type leads where it's just kind of set at standard length, this can actually work against you if you're trying to teach your dog some nice loose lead walking. So one of the things that happens is that as soon as your dog feels tension on their leads, they do tend to then pull against that tension, okay? So if we create tension, they pull back. So that's obviously not going to help with your lead walking. When you clip your dog on one of these leads, they are constantly going to feel a state of tension at the end of the lead. So because this reel that sits inside here is always ready to roll that lead back in and ping it back in, there's always a state of tension on the end of the lead, okay? So whenever your dog walks, it always feels like it's slightly being encouraged to come back. So they've got to pull harder to pull against that resistance to be able to get the lead length that they want and keep walking. So for me, this isn't one to use if you're trying to train loose lead walking or you're trying to encourage that. For me, this is very much an exercise tool. And there are other leads that I would recommend instead of this. But for me, if you've got perhaps an older dog, a dog who is losing hearing or is hard of sight and is perhaps a little bit more vulnerable, then yeah, absolutely, by all means, this is a really good tool to use. So the last few sets of leads we're going to look at today are what we call a long line or a long lead. So these are definitely something that you use when you're looking at training your dog in a more of an off-lead context, okay? It's a nice halfway house between having your dog fully off-lead and perhaps being on a short lead or a flexi lead. So these leads come in a few different types of material. So I've got one here that is like a fabric material, okay, so it's very nice and soft on your hands. The downside of that is that if you use it in muddy places or when it's wet, the lead obviously absorbs that and you're then handling quite a mucky lead, and it adds weight to what your dog's also wearing as well, so it's something to be aware of. But it does mean that you can, if you want to, kind of add extra handles in along the way so that you've got something to hold on to rather than having a line go through your hands. So they come in different materials. So this one's fabric, and this one is what we would call like a plastic leathery type one, okay? So it's waterproof. And so it obviously means that when it does rain, it doesn't absorb that water, but it will go through your hands a little bit easier, okay? So it might slip through your hands. So it might be that you want to wear perhaps a little pair of cycling gloves or something like that, just to save your hands and be able to grab hold of that lead if you need to. But it does mean that you're not washing it all of the time. So by long lead, what I mean is that we have a G-clip at one end, and ideally you're going to attach that to your dog's harness, okay, rather than on their collar, so that if they do suddenly decide they're going to run off to something and they pull up a bit short and they feel some tension at the end of the lead, it's much safer that they feel that tension through a body harness than on the end of a collar. And long lead, what we've got is we've got a lead that comes in various lengths, okay, but it's a long, flat lead, okay. This one has a hoop at the end, but some of them are just completely flat, some have hoops, and this one has been made to have a hoop in the end. So some of the pros of it, which is why I like them, over say a flexi lead for using to try and encourage some good decisions for your dog when they are in an exercise area, is that when your dog is wearing this, they have a greater sense of freedom, okay? So on a flexi lead, like we mentioned before, they always know that they're wearing that lead. They always feel that sense of tension coming through that lead. With this, you can release it so that it's nice and loose, your dog doesn't feel any tension on the lead whatsoever, and you can be holding it or you can have it dropped on the floor as well. So the idea is that your dog feels a lot freer, okay? And so you're hopefully going to see some more realistic examples of choices that they're going to make when they have that level of freedom when the line comes off. When you're using this, it might be that you're looking at working on your dog's recall, it might be that you're looking at just working on some general focus and engagement when they're out and about with you, anything that you'd want to work up to them being kind of in a more off-lead context. This is the type of lead that you want to use as your halfway point between having complete freedom and being on a lead. Last little lead we're going to have a look at today is one that's called a house training line. So it's marketed more so for people that have perhaps got young pups in the house, so that you can have a constant line or point of attachment on the dog whilst they're at home and in the house, so that if they do get into any mischief, you've just got this line on them, which means that you can just take hold of that at some point along the line, and you can guide them to another part of the house or into another situation that you might prefer them to be in. So again, it's got a little tiny G-clip at the end. It's nice, lightweight, thin lead. Like I said, designed mainly to be there so that you can have it on the dog or the puppy really in the house, so that you can just assist them with their training and again just help them make some good choices rather than letting them have a sort of complete freedom. The idea is about kind of removing conflict a little bit as well. So if your puppy is perhaps doing something that you rather they didn't, rather than you kind of going in there and taking hold of their collar or perhaps taking hold of their whole body to be able to do something, you can just step on that line at the end of the lead, right at the end, and then just kind of reel them in, or just be able to pick that line up first and then go in and approach your pup so that you're not going in quite heavy-handed. So the idea is obviously that if your dog is wearing one of these in the home, that they should always be supervised, so they should never be out of sight, so that you want to make sure they don't get tangled or snagged on anything. So it's never something to leave on your dog permanently 24/7. It just needs to be for short bursts of time where perhaps you are slightly preoccupied with something but otherwise completely aware of what your dog is doing. Other little ways that you can use this as well is that because it is quite long, it's quite nice that you can use it to do some training in the garden with your pup. So rather than using one of those big, long, heavy, long lines that we looked at before, perhaps you've got a smaller pup of a smaller breed, then this is quite nice to be able to use in a similar way to a long line, because it's thin and lightweight and is much more appropriate for your smaller style of puppy, okay? And one of the other things that I like about this lead as well is that if you have a dog who's perhaps a little bit aware of wearing their lead and doesn't like one that's too big or too heavy, this is quite nice and lightweight, so that if you could attach this to their collar or their harness, and actually it's much lighter, your dog's a lot less aware of the fact that they're wearing that lead. Whereas if you can imagine we've perhaps got a smaller dog and we've perhaps clipped one of those small but sort of metal chain link type leads on them, that might be a little too heavy for them or a little uncomfortable. So something like this might be a nice alternative in that kind of situation. And that's it for today. So let us know in the comments which part interested you the most, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.